In the charged atmosphere of Courtroom 302 at the Fulton County Superior Court in Atlanta, Georgia, Judge Vivian Blackwell sneered, her gavel suspended in the air like an executioner's axe, casting a long, dark shadow across the polished mahogany bench. "I don't care what your so-called evidence says, boy," she declared, her voice cold and cutting. "In this courtroom, my word is the final law, and you are nothing but another statistic waiting to be processed. Your little charts and graphs mean absolutely nothing to me." Jalen Hale stood tall, his dark eyes locked onto hers, with an unsettling calm radiating from his posture. He didn't flinch, didn't look away, and certainly didn't cower as she expected. "You're right about one thing, Your Honor," he replied, his voice echoing through the silent, breathless courtroom and carrying a weight that made the bailiffs shift uncomfortably. "Someone here is about to become a statistic, but it isn't me." The air inside the courtroom hung heavy with the suffocating weight of predetermined fates. It smelled of stale floor wax, nervous sweat, and decades of systemic routine. The towering mahogany walls, polished to a mirror shine, seemed to physically close in on anyone who didn't belong to the elite echelons of the city's power structure. Oil portraits of severe, older white men, former judges and politicians, stared down from the walls, silent guardians of a deeply flawed establishment. At the absolute center of this oppressive atmosphere sat Judge Vivian Blackwell. She had long ruled her domain with an iron fist and a heart calcified by deep-seated prejudices, which she expertly masked under the politically popular guise of being tough on crime. She was a woman who demanded absolute, unquestioning submission. Her silver hair was pulled back into a severe, unforgiving bun that looked painful to maintain, and her sharp reading glasses were perpetually perched on the bridge of her nose like the crosshairs of a sniper rifle. To the local media and the wealthy suburbanites, Judge Blackwell was a pillar of the community, a no-nonsense adjudicator who kept the chaotic streets safe. But to the marginalized communities of Fulton County, she was the Grim Reaper in a black robe. Her sentences were notoriously, unapologetically skewed. A white defendant caught embezzling thousands from a small business might receive probation and a stern, motherly lecture on second chances and youthful indiscretions. A black defendant caught with a fraction of that amount, however, faced the absolute maximum penalty the state guidelines would allow, often accompanied by a degrading lecture on morality that stretched on and on. She believed herself untouchable, an apex predator in the legal jungle, shielded by absolute judicial immunity and a tightly woven network of corrupt local politicians who owed her their careers. Today, the prey in her crosshairs was Jalen Hale. Jalen was a forensic accountant whose brilliant analytical mind had been a quiet but devastatingly effective asset to several of Atlanta's largest financial firms. He viewed the world in numbers, patterns, and irrefutable data, a mindset that made him entirely immune to Vivian's brand of emotional courtroom terrorism. He wore a crisp, tailored navy suit that fit his athletic frame perfectly, a stark contrast to the oversized, demoralizing orange jumpsuits she usually forced defendants to wear during arraignments just to break their spirits. He carried himself with a quiet, dignified strength that instantly irritated the judge. There was no fear in his eyes, no trembling in his hands. He did not look at the floor. He looked directly at her, studying her with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a dying insect. The charge against him was severe, designed to ensure he never saw the outside of a cell again: felony corporate espionage and grand larceny. The prosecution claimed that Jalen had systematically siphoned millions from a city infrastructure fund, funneling the money into a web of complex offshore accounts. It was a spectacular, headline-grabbing accusation, tailor-made for the evening news. It was also a complete, meticulously engineered fabrication. "Mr. Hale," Vivian drawled, leaning back in her heavy leather chair, the leather creaking loudly in the tense, silent room. "I have read your file. I have seen the depths of your alleged greed. It is truly astounding how someone given so many opportunities by this great city, a city that bent over backwards to accommodate you, could turn around and bite the hand that feeds them with such vicious entitlement." "Your Honor," Jalen's defense attorney, a weary, overworked public defender named Elliot Graves, stood up. His suit was slightly wrinkled, and dark circles framed his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent trying to fight an unwinnable battle. "The defense moves to dismiss. The prosecution's evidence relies entirely on an anonymous tip and doctored ledgers that my client has already proven were completely fabricated." "Overruled," Vivian snapped, slamming her gavel down with a sharp crack before Elliot could finish. "Save your breath, counselor. I've seen enough of these exact cases to know exactly what kind of man your client is. He's a grifter looking for a shortcut, and he got caught with his hand in the city's cookie jar." She stared down at Jalen, her lips curling into a condescending, victorious smirk. She expected him to break, to show the rage, panic, or desperation she so loved to provoke in her courtroom. Instead, Jalen merely raised his chin and adjusted his tie. He knew something she didn't. He knew that the Fulton County Superior Court was about to become ground zero for the largest corruption scandal in Georgia's history, and he was the detonator waiting to be pressed. To fully understand the depth of Judge Vivian Blackwell's breathtaking arrogance, one had to understand the sprawling, invisible machinery of the corruption she protected. The city of Atlanta had approved a massive $2 billion initiative to overhaul public transportation and severely neglected low-income housing sectors. It was championed as a new dawn for the city. In reality, it was a golden opportunity for the city's corrupt elite. Construction contracts were quietly awarded to shell companies owned by city officials' relatives. Vital zoning laws were miraculously bypassed overnight, and millions of dollars allocated for community centers evaporated into the ether, replaced by phantom construction sites that never broke ground. Jalen Hale had been hired as an independent third-party auditor to oversee the initial budget allocations and ensure compliance. It was supposed to be a simple rubber stamp job. The corrupt city officials, blinded by their own prejudices, assumed that Jalen, a young black accountant eager to make a name for himself, would simply sign off on the dense paperwork to secure a hefty consulting fee and a glowing recommendation. They severely underestimated his integrity and his obsessive attention to detail. Through exhaustive late-night sessions with dual monitors glowing in his darkened office, Jalen meticulously followed the digital breadcrumbs. What started as a minor discrepancy in a concrete supplier's invoice unspooled into a labyrinth of sophisticated money laundering. The trail connected the mayor's office, the district attorney, and, sitting at the very top of the judicial protection racket, Judge Vivian Blackwell. She was the ultimate insurance policy. If anyone ever got too close to exposing the scheme, she was tasked with signing fraudulent search warrants, burying crucial evidence under legal red tape, and utterly destroying the lives of potential whistleblowers. When Jalen realized the terrifying magnitude of what he had found, he didn't go to the local police. He knew their internal affairs division was compromised, directly answering to the very district attorney who was pocketing the stolen funds. Instead, he quietly compiled a master ledger, a heavily encrypted hard drive containing every illicit transaction, every kickback bribe, and every offshore routing number. But the cartel found out. A paranoid city councilman noticed the unusual deep-dive queries in Jalen's audit trails. Panicking, the syndicate moved swiftly to silence the threat. They fabricated an entire trail of digital evidence, planted $250,000 in a dummy account established under Jalen's name, and had the compromised district attorney file immediate high-level felony charges. They fast-tracked his case, bypassing standard procedures to land him specifically on Judge Blackwell's docket. It was meant to be a swift, brutal execution of his character and his freedom. Back in the courtroom, the trial was proceeding exactly as Vivian had orchestrated. The prosecuting attorney, a slick, aggressively overconfident man named Victor Lang, whose custom suits cost more than a public defender's monthly salary, was currently questioning their star witness, a disgraced former colleague of Jalen's named Caldwell, who had been heavily bribed to commit perjury. "And so, Mr. Caldwell," Victor paced theatrically in front of the jury box, his voice dripping with faux, rehearsed outrage, "you personally witnessed the defendant, Jalen Hale, altering the municipal code to divert these critical funds from the housing projects into his own pockets." "Yes, sir," Caldwell lied, his voice wavering slightly. He was sweating profusely under the harsh courtroom lights, frantically dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. He adamantly refused to look at Jalen. "He told me he deserved the money. He said the city owed him for all his hard work." "Objection!" Elliot Graves leaped to his feet, knocking his chair back. "Hearsay! The witness is fabricating entire conversations with no corroborating documentation, and the prosecution is leading the witness." "Overruled!" Vivian barked, her voice echoing like a gunshot through the room. "The witness is answering the question perfectly well, counselor. Sit down and stop interrupting the flow of this trial with your desperate stalling tactics." Vivian leaned forward, resting her chin on her steepled hands, offering the sweating Caldwell a reassuring, sickeningly sweet smile. She was thoroughly enjoying this. She loved the dark theater of a rigged trial. She loved watching a man's life be systematically dismantled piece by piece, knowing she held the ultimate power to stop it yet actively choosing to accelerate it. She glanced at Jalen, eager to see the light die in his eyes. But Jalen wasn't looking at the witness or the judge. He was calmly writing something on a yellow legal pad. He finished his sentence with a sharp period, capped his pen with a quiet click, and slid the notepad over to his terrified attorney. Elliot looked down at the pad, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. The note didn't say, "We are losing." It didn't say, "Please make a plea deal." The note simply read, "Let them finish the perjury. The trap is perfectly set." Throughout the trial proceedings, Judge Vivian Blackwell turned Courtroom 302 into a horrifying masterclass of judicial tyranny. The heat in the room seemed to rise with every passing hour as the air conditioning suspiciously failed to keep up. Every single motion filed by the defense was denied with brutal, rapid-fire precision. When Elliot attempted to introduce Jalen's impeccable work history, his lack of any prior record, and a dozen high-profile character witnesses, Vivian deemed it entirely irrelevant to the current charges and barred them from testifying. When the defense requested an independent forensic analysis of the IP addresses used to frame Jalen, a basic right in any cybercrime case, Vivian cited a fabricated lack of foundational merit and shut the motion down before Elliot could even present his expert. The jury, composed mostly of working-class citizens easily swayed by the booming voice of authority, watched in confused, uncomfortable silence. They could tangibly sense the heavy, suffocating bias radiating from the bench. But Vivian manipulated the narrative and the legal jargon so skillfully that they were left with only one logical conclusion: Jalen must be incredibly guilty. Otherwise, why would a respected superior court judge be so visibly disgusted by him? When the prosecution rested its airtight, entirely fabricated case, Victor Lang buttoned his suit jacket and shot a knowing, victorious smirk toward the bench. Vivian offered a microscopic, acknowledging nod in return. The fix was officially in. It was time to wrap up the charade, deliver a guilty verdict, and send Jalen Hale to a maximum security prison for a long time to rot in silence. "Mr. Graves," Vivian said, her tone dripping with patronizing exhaustion, as if simply enduring their presence was a massive burden. "Does the defense have any final witnesses they wish to call? Or are we ready to move to closing arguments so we can all finally go home to our families?" Elliot, sweating through his shirt and visibly trembling under the crushing weight of the rigged system, looked at Jalen. Jalen, cool as ice, gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "Your Honor," Elliot said, his voice cracking slightly before he planted his feet and found his resolve. "The defense calls Jalen Hale to the stand." A shocked murmur rippled through the gallery. The court reporter's fingers paused over her keys. In criminal trials, putting the defendant on the stand was a massive, desperate risk, often viewed as a Hail Mary when all else failed. Vivian's eyebrows shot up to her hairline in genuine surprise. This wasn't part of the script. Defendants like Jalen were supposed to cower in silence, overwhelmed by the insurmountable power of the state, taking their beatings quietly. "Very well," Vivian said, recovering quickly, though her voice dropped an octave, a dangerous, warning edge creeping into her tone. "Bailiff, swear him in. Let's hear what kind of story he spun for himself." Jalen walked to the witness stand with the measured, steady pace of a lion entering an arena he secretly owned. He placed his left hand firmly on the worn leather Bible, raised his right, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. As he sat down, he adjusted the microphone closer to his mouth. The sudden, quiet screech of the audio feedback pierced the room, making Vivian physically wince. "Let's get this over with," she muttered under her breath, yet loud enough for the court reporter to catch. A blatant, shocking display of bias that would normally guarantee an immediate mistrial in any fair court. But she didn't care. She was untouchable. Elliot approached the wooden podium, his hands gripping the edges to hide their shaking. "Mr. Hale, the prosecution has spent these past days painting a picture of you as a criminal mastermind who orchestrated a multi-million-dollar theft against the very people of this city. Did you steal money from the Atlanta Infrastructure Fund?" "No, I did not," Jalen said. His voice was deep, clear, and perfectly modulated. It carried to every far corner of the room, vibrating with absolute certainty. "Objection," Victor drawled lazily from his table, barely looking up from his phone. "Self-serving statement sustained," Vivian said instantly, her gavel hovering. "The jury will completely disregard the defendant's denial. It holds no evidentiary weight." Elliot blinked, absolutely stunned by the audacity of the ruling. "Your Honor, you just sustained an objection to a defendant fundamentally denying the charge against him on the witness stand. That is his constitutional right." "Watch your tone with me, counselor," Vivian hissed, leaning violently over the bench, her eyes flashing with pure malice and unchecked ego. "I make the rulings here, not the Constitution, and certainly not you. If you question my authority again in front of this jury, I will hold you in summary contempt and have you escorted to a holding cell downstairs. Ask your next question, or I will end this testimony right now." Jalen looked at Elliot, his expression completely unfazed by the judge's venom. "It's all right, Elliot. Ask the second question." Elliot swallowed hard, wiping his brow. "Mr. Hale, if you did not steal the money, who did?" The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet. Vivian's hand flew to her gavel, her knuckles turning bone white as she gripped the wood. She opened her mouth to shut it down, to scream an objection herself if she had to, recognizing the sudden, terrifying shift in the room's energy. But Jalen was faster, and he was absolutely ruthless. The money was stolen by a highly synchronized, deeply embedded operation, he said. Specifically, the housing funds were diverted using a shell corporation named Blackwell Apex Holdings, routing number 0842291114. Vivian's gavel slammed down with the concussive force of a bomb going off. "Strike that from the record!" she shrieked, her face flushing a deep, violently ugly shade of crimson. Her carefully crafted facade of bored superiority shattered instantly. "Objection sustained. This is outrageous. The defendant is making wild, libelous, unsubstantiated accusations." Routing number 0842291114, Jalen continued, completely ignoring the screaming judge and leaning closer to the microphone so his voice boomed over her frantic banging. His eyes locked dead onto Vivian's panicked face. An offshore account held at the Grand Cayman National Bank. Primary account holder, Vivian Evelyn Blackwell. Absolute chaos erupted in the gallery. Reporters in the back rows gasped audibly, their pens furiously scratching across notepads, some already pulling out their phones to tweet the bombshell. The jury members snapped to attention, their jaws practically hitting the floor as they stared back and forth between the calm accountant and the hyperventilating judge. Victor Lang leaped completely over his desk, his expensive suit snagging on a chair. "Your Honor, move for an immediate mistrial. The witness is completely out of control. He's lying." "Bailiff!" Vivian screamed, standing up so fast her chair crashed against the wall behind her. Her black robe billowed around her like a panicked bat's wings. She was entirely losing her mind. The untouchable armor was cracking violently, and the sheer raw terror of total exposure was bleeding through. "Bailiff, remove this man from the stand immediately. Detain him. Gag him if you have to. Get him out of my courtroom." Two heavily armed local bailiffs started jogging toward the witness box, hands on their holsters. But Jalen held up a single steady hand. The gesture was so commanding, so deeply authoritative and self-assured that the bailiffs instinctively skidded to a halt, unsure of what they were walking into. "Before you even think about touching me," Jalen said, his voice suddenly shifting from the defensive tone of the accused to the cold, hard tone of a federal commander. He reached slowly, deliberately into his suit jacket. "He's got a weapon! Shoot him!" Vivian shrieked, ducking cowardly behind her thick wooden bench, her voice pitching into a hysterical wail. Jalen pulled out a small, sleek, metallic silver rectangle. It wasn't a weapon. It was a highly sophisticated, military-grade, encrypted transmitter. He placed it gently on the wooden ledge of the witness stand for everyone to see. A small, vibrant green light was blinking rhythmically on its obsidian surface, pulsing like a heartbeat. "I am not just a forensic accountant, Vivian," Jalen said, dropping the formal "Your Honor" for the first time. The blatant disrespect hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. She slowly peeked her head over the bench, her eyes wide with horror at the blinking device. "For quite some time, I have been working as a confidential, deep-cover informant and analyst for the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Unit." The color completely drained from Vivian's face, leaving her looking like a withered corpse. She tried to speak, to yell another order, but her throat had seized up completely. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish suffocating on dry land. "Everything you have said in this courtroom," Jalen continued, his voice cold, unrelenting, and devoid of any mercy. "Every heavily biased ruling, every illegal suppression of evidence, and every direct threat you just made to my attorney on the record has been broadcast in real time on a secured, encrypted federal frequency to an FBI mobile command truck parked exactly 1 block away from this courthouse." "You're lying," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling so violently it barely carried past her desk. The racist, arrogant, godlike facade had been entirely obliterated, revealing the pathetic, terrified criminal cowering underneath. "You don't have the authority. I am a Superior Court judge of the state of Georgia. I have absolute immunity." Jalen looked at his watch, tapping the glass face with one finger. 3, 2, 1. The heavy double oak doors at the back of Courtroom 302 did not just open, they were blown violently apart, slamming against the walls with a thunderous crash that shook the room. A dozen men and women wearing heavy tactical gear and navy blue windbreakers with the bright, terrifying yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their backs flooded into the room. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, immediately securing every exit and aggressively flanking the prosecutor's table. The local bailiffs, realizing instantly that they were entirely out of their depth, outgunned, and out of their jurisdiction, smartly raised their hands and stepped back flat against the walls, offering no resistance. Walking calmly and purposefully behind the tactical team was a tall, imposing man in a sharp gunmetal gray suit. He shared Jalen's dark eyes and athletic build, but possessed the battle-hardened edge of a man who spent his life hunting predators. He held a thick, heavily sealed leather folder in his hand. He was Special Agent in Charge Derek Hale, Jalen's older brother, and the ruthless head of the Department of Justice's Regional Anti-Corruption Task Force. "Nobody move a muscle!" Derek's voice boomed through the room, commanding absolute, immediate obedience. He completely bypassed the stunned gallery, bypassed the panicked prosecutor who was currently trying and failing to discreetly drop a burner phone into a plastic trash can, and walked straight up the steps to the judge's bench. Judge Vivian Blackwell was shaking so violently that her reading glasses slipped off her sweat-slicked nose and clattered loudly onto her desk. She looked wildly around the room, her eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for a non-existent escape route. But there was only the cold, unblinking, heavily armed stares of federal agents. "Judge Vivian Blackwell," Derek Hale said, his voice completely devoid of any warmth, respect, or deference to her position. He opened the leather folder and slapped a thick, multi-page document directly onto her pristine desk, right over her gavel. "I have in my possession a federal grand jury indictment signed directly by the Attorney General of the United States. You are under arrest." On what grounds?" Vivian stammered, tears of sheer panic and disbelief welling in her eyes, ruining her expensive mascara. "This is a state courtroom. You have no jurisdiction over me. I am the law here. You can't do this." Jalen stood up from the witness stand, smoothing his tie, and walked over to stand shoulder to shoulder with his brother. He looked down at the pathetic woman who had tried to maliciously destroy his life. A woman who had gleefully destroyed the lives of countless innocent people just to line her own pockets and feed her twisted, racist ego. "The grounds are extensive, Vivian," Jalen answered for his brother, savoring every single syllable. "Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. Multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit federal perjury, obstruction of justice, embezzlement of federal infrastructure funds, and my personal favorite, deprivation of rights under color of law. We've attached a federal hate crime enhancement to the charges based on the undeniable statistical analysis of your sentencing disparities throughout her years on the bench. The data doesn't lie." Vivian let out a choked, guttural sob, burying her face in her hands. "You set me up! You filthy, lying—" "I didn't set you up," Jalen interrupted, his voice cutting through her desperate insult like a surgeon's scalpel. "I just gave you the rope. Your own unchecked arrogance, your own disgusting prejudice, did the hanging. I just watched you tie the knot." Derek nodded to a burly FBI agent standing nearby. "Cuff her." The federal agent stepped quickly behind the bench. "Stand up, ma'am. Hands where I can see them," he ordered. Vivian Blackwell, the feared hanging judge of Fulton County, the woman who had coldly laughed as she sent innocent young men to maximum security prisons for crimes they didn't commit. found her legs completely giving out. She couldn't stand. She collapsed backward into her expensive leather chair, weeping hysterically, her carefully pinned hair coming entirely undone and hanging in ragged, sweaty gray strands across her face. The agent showed zero mercy. He grabbed her firmly by the upper arm, hauled her roughly to her feet, and forcefully twisted her arms behind her back. The sharp, metallic click-clack of the cold steel handcuffs locking tightly around Vivian's wrists echoed beautifully through the dead silent courtroom. To Jalen, it was the most magnificent symphony he had ever heard. "Vivian Blackwell," the agent recited loudly, pulling her physically away from the mahogany throne she had weaponized for so long. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they began to perp-walk her down the center aisle of the courtroom, the gallery, which had been paralyzed with shock for the last several minutes, suddenly erupted. The tension broke violently. People were cheering. A mother whose innocent teenage son had been sent to prison by Vivian years earlier began weeping loudly in pure joy. A few members of the jury actually stood up in their box and began clapping. Elliot Graves, the exhausted public defender who had nearly lost his legal license to her bullying just moments ago, leaned back against his desk, burying his face in his hands and laughing in pure, unadulterated relief. The true, devastating humiliation, however, awaited her outside the building. Jalen and Derek had orchestrated the sting with flawless precision. As the FBI agents forcefully pushed Vivian through the heavy front glass doors of the courthouse, a blinding wall of flashing cameras and shouting reporters greeted her. The Department of Justice had intentionally leaked the arrest warrant to the press minutes prior to the breach. Every major news network in Atlanta, along with several national syndicates, was there, broadcasting her downfall live to millions of viewers. Vivian frantically tried to hide her face behind her shackled hands, but there was absolutely nowhere to hide. The blazing Georgia sun illuminated her tear-streaked face, her ruined, smudged makeup, and the silver federal handcuffs binding her wrists. She was shoved unceremoniously into the back of a blacked-out federal SUV. The heavy door slammed shut with a sickening thud, closing the book on her career, her freedom, and her tyrannical, racist legacy. Jalen walked out of the courthouse a few minutes later, side by side with his brother. The crisp afternoon air tasted remarkably sweet and clean. He took a deep, cleansing breath, looking back up at the imposing stone pillars of the courthouse. It was an imperfect system, deeply flawed and easily corrupted by those who craved power. But today, they had carved out a massive, rotting chunk of that corruption. "You did good, kid. Real good," Derek said, clapping his heavy hand on Jalen's shoulder. "The mayor and the district attorney were just picked up by SWAT at City Hall. We got the whole damn network in one swoop." "It's a start," Jalen replied softly, his analytical mind already moving to the next phase. "Now we audit every single case she ever touched. We're going to get a lot of innocent people out of cages, Derek. The real work starts tomorrow. The wheels of federal justice grind incredibly slowly, but when they finally turn, they grind exceedingly fine." In the months that followed, the entire landscape of Atlanta's judicial and political system was unrecognizable. Jalen Hale's meticulous, airtight ledgers, combined with the devastating audio recordings from the courtroom sting operation, created an insurmountable mountain of hard evidence. Faced with the terrifying prospect of over a century in federal prison, the corrupt district attorney and the mayor immediately flipped. They turned state's evidence like cowards, laying the entirety of the blame and the architecture of the cover-up squarely on Vivian Blackwell. Her trial was not held in the comfortable, familiar, deeply segregated surroundings of Fulton County. To prevent jury tampering, she was dragged into federal court in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles away from her political cronies, her wealth, and her local influence. Stripped of her empowering black robe, she sat hunched at the defendant's table, wearing an oversized, humiliating olive green federal prison jumpsuit. The irony of her attire was poetic, brutal, and absolute. Her defense was pitiful to watch. Without her power to control the room, she was nothing. Her lawyers tried to claim she was manipulated by the men around her, that she was merely a naive victim of a deep-state political conspiracy. The federal jury, unswayed by her crocodile tears, deliberated briefly before returning a verdict of guilty on all 47 counts. At her sentencing hearing, the courtroom was packed. Jalen Hale sat in the front row of the gallery, right behind the prosecution. He wore the exact same crisp, tailored navy suit he had worn on the day she had tried to destroy him. Vivian looked frail, broken, and utterly defeated. The vicious arrogance that had once defined her entire existence had been completely hollowed out, replaced only by the hollow, dead-eyed stare of a woman who knew her life was effectively over. The presiding federal judge, a stern, unforgiving man with absolutely zero patience for public corruption, looked down at her from his bench with visible, palpable disgust. "Vivian Blackwell," the judge said, his voice echoing through the massive room with the heavy finality of a tomb shutting forever. "You were entrusted by the public with the sacred foundational duty of upholding justice and equity. Instead, you weaponized the law to oppress the most vulnerable among us, to line your own pockets with stolen funds, and to feed your own vile prejudices. You shattered families. You destroyed futures. You are a profound disgrace to the bench, to the legal profession, and to this country." He paused, adjusting his glasses, looking at the crying woman with no sympathy. "I sentence you to 45 years in the Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary to be served consecutively, without the possibility of parole. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals." Vivian let out a faint, pathetic whimper, her knees buckling as the heavy-set marshals grabbed her arms to drag her away. As she was turned around to be led out of the courtroom, her bloodshot eyes met Jalen's one last time across the aisle. There was no defiance left in her, no sneering superiority. There was only a desperate, silent plea for mercy, the exact same mercy she had callously denied to thousands of others who had stood before her. Jalen didn't smile. He didn't gloat, and he didn't offer a dramatic parting word. He simply looked at her, his expression perfectly neutral, a silent judge of his own, until she was dragged kicking and sobbing through the heavy oak doors and out of his sight forever. Justice had not just been served. It had been violently balanced. The untouchable judge had touched the third rail, and the man she thought was just a disposable statistic had written the final, devastating chapter of her demise. What an intense, heart-pounding, and deeply satisfying story of karma and ultimate justice. If your blood boiled with righteous anger at Judge Vivian's sheer, unfiltered arrogance, and you felt a surge of triumph when Jalen flipped the entire courtroom upside down with that brilliant FBI sting operation, then you know exactly how powerful the truth can be. This story proves that absolutely no one is above the law, no matter how untouchable and powerful they think they are. If you love this incredible story of an underdog outsmarting a deeply corrupt system and delivering hard-hitting, undeniable karma, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and pushes these amazing stories out to more people. Don't forget to share this video with your friends to spread this satisfying message of justice. And if you want more incredible, jaw-dropping drama, true crime-style setups, and epic revenge stories just like this one, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. What was your absolute favorite moment of karma in this story? Was it the transmitter reveal or the FBI raid? See you in the next video.